The 17-0 Miami Dolphins. Come on, let's be for real. Every year, when the last undefeated team falls, these guys crawl out of the woodwork to toast their own greatness. And look, going undefeated is hard. It's an incredible achievement. But let's be real. The 1972 Dolphins played a schedule that was softer than a marshmallow in a microwave. Statistically, their opponents that year had a combined winning percentage of .397. They didn't face a single team with a winning record in the entire regular season. Not one. It's the NFL equivalent of a heavyweight champion defending his title against 15 consecutive middle schoolers. When they finally got to the Super Bowl, they were actually 1-point underdogs to the Redskins. Even the bookies in '72 knew this perfect team was skating on thin ice. They won, but it wasn't a blowout. It was a 14-7 slog. They're a dynasty built on a foundation of easy wins and a very loud alumni association. But hey, at least they stayed together. What about the team that was so dominant, they literally couldn't stop fighting each other long enough to win a fourth ring? If the Dolphins are the perfect dynasty, the '90s Cowboys are the ego dynasty. Don't get me wrong, that roster was terrifying. Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin were the triplets for a reason. But here's the cold, hard truth. The Cowboys' dynasty was basically a 4-year window that Jerry Jones blew up because he wanted more credit than Jimmy Johnson. They won 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, which is legendary. But people talk about them like they ruled the '90s. In reality, they were irrelevant by 1996. While the Patriots spent 2 decades being the boogeyman, the Cowboys were a supernova, bright, loud, and gone in a flash. Once Jimmy Johnson left, the culture devolved into a mess of off-field scandals and entitlement. They're remembered as this eternal powerhouse, but they were really just a very expensive, very talented group of guys who peaked early and crashed even harder. Speaking of teams that people think were more dominant than they actually were, let's talk about the team that literally had the rules of the game changed because they were too mean. The Steel Curtain. The 4 rings in 6 years. The black and gold standard. It sounds bulletproof, right? Well, let's look at the gap. The Steelers won in '74 and '75, and then they disappeared for a while. They didn't win another one until '78. During that dynasty run, Terry Bradshaw was, and I say this with love, a turnover machine. In 1974, the year they won their first Super Bowl, Bradshaw threw 6 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. He wasn't exactly Joe Montana. The defense was legendary, sure, but they were also playing in an era where they could practically mug a wide receiver at the line of scrimmage. The NFL literally had to invent the Mel Blount rule in 1978 just to give offenses a fighting chance. When you have to change the laws of physics to stop a team, were they great, or were they just exploiting a glitch in the system? But at least the Steelers finished the job. What about the team that had the most explosive offense in history and only came away with 1 lonely ring? If you look at a highlight reel from 1999 to 2001, you'd think the St. Louis Rams were the greatest team to ever lace up cleats. Kurt Warner coming from a grocery store to win MVP, Marshall Faulk doing things that shouldn't be legal. It was beautiful. But a dynasty usually requires more than 1 trophy. The Rams are often whispered about in the same breath as the '80s Niners, but they only won 1 Super Bowl. They went back in 2001 and got absolutely bullied by a young Tom Brady and a Patriots defense that realized if you just hit their fast receivers, the whole system collapses. They had the highest cool factor in NFL history, but they lacked in certain parts to be called a true dynasty. They were a brilliant firework, spectacular to watch, but they didn't leave much behind. Of course, if we're talking about one-hit wonders masquerading as dynasties, we have to talk about the team that defined America's team before the Cowboys ever did. Wait, don't throw your cheese heads at me. Vince Lombardi is a god. The trophy is named after him. But if we're being objective, the '60s Packers were the kings of a much smaller castle. The league was tiny back then. In 1961, there were only 14 teams. Winning a championship meant beating one team in a title game. It was a completely different sport. By the time the Super Bowl era actually started and the league expanded, the Packers' dominance began to fade. They won the first 2 Super Bowls, but the level of competition was nowhere near what it would become in the 70s and 80s. We remember them as the ultimate dynasty because they were the first, not necessarily because they were the best. But hey, at least they didn't lose 4 Super Bowls in a row, which brings us to a team that redefined the word almost. Are they a dynasty? Some people say yes because they went to 4 straight Super Bowls. I say, how can you be a dynasty if you never actually won the big one? The Bills were an incredible team. The K-Gun offense was ahead of its time. Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Bruce Smith, that's a Hall of Fame sandwich right there. But the definition of a dynasty is success and dominance. You can't be dominant if you're 0-4 on the biggest stage. They are the most talented what if in history. But calling them a dynasty is like calling a guy a billionaire because he almost won the Powerball 4 times. But if the Bills are the almost dynasty, our next team is the system dynasty, the one everyone hates, but for the wrong reasons. I know. How can the Patriots be overrated? 6 rings, 20 years. But let's look specifically at the first half of that run, the 2001 to 2004 years. During those 3 Super Bowl wins, Tom Brady wasn't the GOAT yet. He was a high-level game manager. The Patriots won those games because of an elite defense, a legendary kicker in Adam Vinatieri, and, let's be honest, a massive amount of luck. Tuck rule, anyone? They won those 3 Super Bowls by a combined total of 9 points. They were a few plays away from being the almost Bills. We retroactively apply the unstoppable label to those early teams because of what Brady became later, but at the time, they were the ultimate grinded-out team that caught every single break. But at least they were consistent. Some teams were dynasties only because their division was a dumpster fire for a decade. Joe Gibbs is the only coach to win 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. That is an insane stat. It's also proof that the team was the star, not the individuals. But while the Redskins were great, they are often overshadowed by the 49ers and the Giants of the same era. They were, dynasty of convenience. They were the team that stepped up whenever the Niners had an off year. They were physically dominant, sure, but they lacked that aura of invincibility. They were the blue-collar dynasty, hardworking, effective, but maybe a little bit overrated, because they played in an era where smash-mouth football was the only way to win. Speaking of smash-mouth, what happens when a team is so physical they forget how to score points? 4 Super Bowl appearances, 0 wins. Sound familiar? The Purple People Eaters were the most feared defense of the 70s. Alan Page was literally the MVP as a defensive tackle. But like the Bills, the Vikings dynasty is a myth built on regular season dominance. They would destroy everyone in December and then turn into pumpkins in January. They are remembered as a powerhouse, but in the games that actually mattered, they were outscored 95-34 across 4 Super Bowls. That's not a dynasty, that's a very impressive recurring guest star. Not gonna lie, this is my favorite. We have to talk about the mini dynasty that everyone thinks is the next big thing, but might just be a one-man show. Okay, before you storm my house, hear me out. Patrick Mahomes is the best to ever do it. The Chiefs have 3 rings in 5 years. They are a dynasty. But are they overrated? Compare them to the 2000s Patriots. The Patriots would beat teams by 20 points and leave them questioning their life choices. The Chiefs? They play with their food. Almost every game they win is a one-score nail-biter where Mahomes has to pull a rabbit out of a hat in the last 2 minutes. They have the second lowest DVOA of any top-tier dynasty in history. They aren't dominant in the traditional sense. They're just clutch. If 1 or 2 plays go the other way, we aren't talking about a dynasty. We're talking about a very lucky team with a generational quarterback.